Carl Gustav Jung, one of the most influential figures in 20th century psychology, dedicated his life to exploring the hidden depths of the human mind. Unlike Sigmund Freud, who emphasized sexuality and childhood in shaping personality, Jung ventured into the realm of myth, religion, and symbolism to uncover what he called the collective unconscious. For Jung, the human mind was not simply a linear machine but a vast and mysterious landscape, populated by forces he described as archetypes, universal patterns that shape thought, feeling, and behavior. Yet Jung was not naive about the dangers of this exploration. He insisted that certain places in the psyche, states of consciousness or archetypal encounters, could overwhelm, destabilize, and even destroy a person's sanity. These psychological places are not physical, but they are as real as the outer world. They are terrains of darkness, temptation, and visionary intensity that can either transform the self or lead to psychosis. This video will explore 12 dangerous places in Jungian psychology, realms within the unconscious that carry immense potential but also grave risks. By examining the shadow, the Anima Animus, archetypal inflation, dream obsession, and mystical fixation, we will see how Jung's map of the psyche is both a guide to growth and a warning of destruction. Jung's map of the psyche. To understand the dangerous places Jung identified, we must first grasp the psychological map he drew of the human psyche. Jung divided the psyche into three primary layers: the conscious ego, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. These layers were not separate compartments, but dynamic realms that interacted continuously, sometimes in harmony, but often in conflict. The ego is the center of conscious awareness, the sense of I that directs attention, makes decisions, and maintains our social persona. Yet Jung warned that the ego is only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies a vast underworld of unconscious contents. The personal unconscious consists of forgotten memories, repressed emotions, and material unique to the individual. Much like Freud's unconscious, it stores what we cannot or will not confront in daily life. But Jung went further. Beneath the personal unconscious lies the collective unconscious, a reservoir of universal symbols, myths, and instincts inherited by all humanity. Jung described this as the psychic equivalent of the body's genetic inheritance. Just as our DNA contains the blueprint for physical development, the collective unconscious contains archetypes, primordial images and themes such as the hero, the mother, the shadow, and the trickster that shape human imagination across cultures and eras. Jung often spoke of the psyche as a landscape with regions that could be visited, explored, and sometimes wandered into at great peril. In his own writings, especially the Red Book, he described visionary journeys through strange psychic terrains populated by figures that felt both alien and deeply familiar. These encounters could heal and enlighten, but they could also unmoor a person's sense of self. Thus, the Jungian psyche is not a safe or orderly domain. It is a wilderness with rivers of meaning and forests of fear. To wander through it without preparation is to risk losing one's bearings, and in Jung's language, to fall into inflation, possession, or fragmentation. The map itself is awe-inspiring, but the territories it describes are dangerous places indeed. The shadow, confronting darkness. Perhaps the most infamous of Jung's dangerous places is the shadow. The shadow represents all that we repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. It contains anger, envy, greed, lust, cowardice, qualities that clash with our conscious self-image. But it also holds creative and instinctual energies that have been banished by societal norms. At first glance, the shadow appears to be merely a storehouse of moral failings. Yet Jung warned that to underestimate it is perilous. What we refuse to confront within ourselves does not disappear, it grows in the dark and projects outward. This is the mechanism of projection, by which we attribute our own disowned qualities to others. The bigot who condemns others' immorality may be repressing his own desires. The authoritarian leader who obsesses over enemies may be haunted by his own weakness. The shadow becomes truly destructive when it possesses the individual. Instead of recognizing anger as their own, a person may become consumed by rage against imagined foes. Entire nations, Jung observed, can fall under the spell of the collective shadow, as in the rise of fascism in the 20th century. He wrote, "The change must begin with the individual. Nobody can afford to look round and wait for somebody else to do what he is loath to do himself." The danger of the shadow lies not only in violence or projection but also in psychological breakdown. Jung noted that patients who encountered their shadow without preparation often fell into despair or paranoia. For example, the dream of being pursued by a dark figure might be a call to integrate one's aggression, but if taken literally it could lead to delusions of persecution. To work with the shadow is essential for individuation, the process of becoming whole, but it is also a perilous descent. Jung compared it to confronting the devil in myth. To deny the shadow is to risk moral blindness, to be swallowed by it is to risk madness. The only safe path lies in a careful middle way, acknowledging the shadow without identifying with it. The Anima and Animus, inner gendered spirits. Beyond the shadow lies another perilous archetype, the Anima and Animus. These represent the inner contrasexual elements of the psyche, the feminine aspect within men, Anima, and the masculine aspect within women, Animus. Jung believed that integrating these inner figures was crucial for psychological balance, but he also warned of their dangers. The anima appears in dreams and fantasies as mysterious women, seductive, spiritual, or destructive. She embodies intuition, creativity, and feeling, but when unintegrated, she can overwhelm a man with mood swings, irrational desires, or obsessive love. The animus, by contrast, appears as wise men, prophets, or tyrants in a woman's psyche. He represents rationality and authority, but when unbalanced, he can manifest as rigid dogmatism, relentless criticism, or an inner tyrant. The danger of these archetypes is possession. A man possessed by his anima may abandon his rational self for romantic illusions, confusing projection with reality. He falls in love not with a real woman, but with his own unconscious image projected onto her. This can lead to destructive relationships and a cycle of disappointment. A woman possessed by the animus may become harshly opinionated, dominated by inner voices that tell her what is true with absolute certainty, even when detached from reality. Jung noted that many mental illnesses reflect these forms of possession. A patient convinced she must obey the command of a stern male voice may be under the sway of the animus. A man driven to obsession with a fantasy muse may be entangled with his anima. Literature and myth are full of such examples: Odysseus tempted by the sirens, or Faust seduced by the eternal feminine. Yet the anima and animus are not purely destructive. Properly integrated, they become guides to deeper wisdom and bridges to the self. But this integration requires courage and careful psychological work. To enter this inner realm without guidance is to risk losing oneself in delusion, fantasy, and possession. The collective unconscious and archetypes. If the shadow and the anima animus are dangerous because they destabilize the individual, the collective unconscious is dangerous because of its sheer scale. Jung described it as the deepest stratum of the psyche, common to all humans, and structured by archetypes, primordial patterns of behavior and imagination. Archetypes are not images themselves, but underlying blueprints that take form in myths, dreams, and symbols. The hero, the wise old man, the trickster, the great mother, the child, these appear across cultures, from Greek mythology to Native American stories, from Hindu epics to modern films. Jung believed that when we dream of a wise guide, a dark pursuer, or a radiant child, we are encountering archetypal forces that rise from the collective unconscious. But these forces are not merely symbolic, they are psychic energies. Jung warned that when an archetype overwhelms the conscious ego, it can lead to inflation or psychosis. A person who identifies with the hero archetype may believe he has a world-saving mission. Someone possessed by the trickster may revel in chaos and deception without regard for reality. Entire societies, Jung suggested, can be gripped by archetypes. In times of crisis, a nation may project the archetype of the savior onto a political leader, giving rise to cults of personality. Alternatively, the archetype of the enemy can fuel hatred and war. For Jung, World War II was an eruption of the collective unconscious, the shadow and the Wotan archetype consuming the German psyche. The danger of the collective unconscious lies in its impersonal power. Unlike the personal unconscious, which deals with one's forgotten memories, the collective unconscious contains forces older than civilization. To enter this psychic territory without preparation is like standing before a flood. Jung's patients who touched archetypal material often reported overwhelming visions, ecstatic states, or terrifying hallucinations. Without careful grounding, these experiences could destroy the fragile balance of the mind. The danger of archetypal inflation. One of Jung's most important warnings about the psyche is the risk of inflation. Inflation occurs when the ego, the conscious sense of I, identifies with an archetype or with the self, the deeper totality of the psyche. Instead of being a limited human being, the person feels they have become divine, chosen, or superhuman. This state is intoxicating. The inflated person may believe they are the Messiah, a world prophet, or the incarnation of an eternal truth. Jung studied many clinical cases in which patients, after visionary encounters with the unconscious, began proclaiming themselves saviors or cosmic rulers. In his own words, the man who is possessed by an archetype has lost himself, for he has identified with a power greater than himself. Historical examples illustrate the danger. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, wrote with extraordinary insight about the human spirit, but near the end of his life, he collapsed into madness, signing letters as Dionysus and the Crucified. Jung suggested Nietzsche had succumbed to archetypal inflation. Similarly, Countless cult leaders, from Jim Jones to modern self-proclaimed prophets, show signs of inflation, identifying with archetypes of savior, father, or king. Their followers, caught in the same archetypal grip, reinforce the delusion until it ends in tragedy. Jung noted that inflation can also manifest subtly in intellectual arrogance, spiritual superiority, or artistic obsession. The artist who believes his work channels divine inspiration may lose touch with everyday reality. The spiritual seeker who identifies with the self may neglect human limitations, drifting into detachment or grandiosity. The danger of inflation is not merely personal but social. When a leader or movement becomes inflated with archetypal energy, it can sweep up millions. Nationalism, religious fanaticism, and political extremism all draw on this psychological mechanism. Jung compared the phenomenon to possession by gods, forces larger than life overtaking ordinary human beings. For Jung, the antidote was humility and integration. Archetypes must be recognized as powerful symbols, not personal identities. The individual must learn to relate to archetypal forces without becoming consumed by them. Otherwise, inflation transforms the quest for wholeness into a path of destruction. Active imagination, a risky practice. Among Jung's most creative contributions to psychology was the method of active imagination. This technique involved entering a meditative or semi-dream state, engaging directly with figures from the unconscious, and allowing them to speak, act, and reveal their meaning. Jung himself used active imagination during his famous Confrontation with the Unconscious from 1913 to 1917, recorded in the Red Book. For Jung, active imagination was a way of bridging the conscious and unconscious mind. Instead of repressing inner voices or images, one invited them into dialogue. Patients might converse with a wise old man, wrestle with a demonic figure, or receive symbolic teachings from a dream character. When guided properly, this process could lead to profound healing and insight. But the risks were enormous. Active imagination opens the door to archetypal material, and without a strong ego, the individual may be overwhelmed. The dialogue may shift from symbolic encounter to hallucination. The inner figures may cease to be seen as aspects of the psyche and instead be believed as literal external entities. Jung noted that many of his patients who practiced active imagination too recklessly fell into psychosis or paranoia. Jung himself struggled with this danger. In the Red Book, he described terrifying visions, floods of blood, serpents, gods, and demons demanding sacrifice. He often feared he was on the brink of madness. Only by maintaining a careful balance between immersion and observation did he avoid being consumed. He compared the practice to walking a tightrope between the conscious and unconscious, too much surrender, and one falls into chaos, too much control, and nothing emerges. Today, many spiritual and psychological traditions have adopted forms of active imagination, such as guided visualization, shamanic journeying, or Jungian analysis. But the danger remains. To open the gates of the unconscious is to invite forces larger than the ego. Without grounding in daily life, community, and rational thought, the practice can lead not to healing but to delusion. In Jung's words, the unconscious is not only the source of creativity but also a wild beast. Active imagination attempts to tame this beast, but if the process is mishandled, the beast may instead devour the one who dared to call it forth. Dreams as dangerous portals. For Jung, dreams were the royal road to the unconscious. Unlike Freud, who often reduced dreams to disguised wish fulfillment, Jung saw them as symbolic communications from the deeper psyche, guiding the dreamer toward balance and individuation. Yet he also warned that dreams are not always benevolent. They can act as dangerous portals into overwhelming archetypal realms. Dreams can confront us with truths we refuse to face consciously. Nightmares of being pursued may symbolize the shadow, while dreams of drowning may reveal a fear of being engulfed by emotions. Such imagery can be healing if properly interpreted, but if misunderstood, it can provoke paranoia, despair, or obsession. A patient who repeatedly dreams of death, for example, may conclude they are doomed to die soon, when the dream may simply symbolize transformation. The danger intensifies when a person begins to over-identify with dreams. Jung saw patients who became consumed by their dream life, neglecting external reality. Some believed every dream contained divine prophecy, interpreting trivial details as cosmic signs. Instead of integrating the dream message, they were swallowed by it. In these cases, dreams ceased to be guides and became tyrants. Certain archetypal dreams are especially perilous. Jung described big dreams that seem to come not from the personal unconscious but from the collective unconscious. These often contain overwhelming images, floods, gods, apocalyptic battles. A dream of being chosen as a savior, for instance, may ignite inflation. A dream of eternal torment may trigger despair or psychosis. Jung noted that in primitive cultures, such dreams often led to shamanic initiation, but without a cultural framework, modern individuals risked collapse. Dreams are powerful precisely because they blur the line between inner and outer reality. When archetypal content is projected outward, the dreamer may begin to live in a fantasy world. A dream of betrayal may cause suspicion toward loved ones. A dream of cosmic mission may lead to grandiosity. For this reason, Jung insisted that dreams require interpretation grounded in both symbolism and real life. They are not predictions to be obeyed blindly but messages to be integrated carefully. Thus, dreams are double-edged swords. They can heal, but they can also unhinge. The dream world is a portal to the unconscious, but to enter it unprepared is to risk wandering forever in its labyrinths. Mysticism and occult influences. One of the most controversial aspects of Jung's psychology is his deep engagement with mysticism and the occult. Unlike Freud, who dismissed religion as illusion, Jung took spiritual traditions seriously as expressions of archetypal truth. He studied alchemy, astrology, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, Taoism, and Eastern philosophies, seeing in them symbolic maps of the psyche. Jung argued that alchemical texts, for example, were not merely about turning lead into gold but about psychological transformation, the integration of opposites and the birth of the self. Mandalas, he believed, symbolized wholeness, appearing spontaneously in dreams and art when the psyche sought balance. These insights were groundbreaking, but they also carried dangers. The first danger is mystical inflation. When individuals encounter symbolic or mystical material, they may believe they have attained cosmic wisdom or divine status. Jung observed that patients dabbling in occult practices often fell into grandiosity. Instead of using symbols for self-understanding, they used them to escape reality. The second danger is psychic disorientation. Jung noted that practices such as mediumship, automatic writing, and occult rituals could open the unconscious in uncontrolled ways. The practitioner might hear voices, see visions, or channel archetypal forces without realizing these were psychic contents. The result could be possession, obsession, or psychosis. Jung himself walked a fine line with these practices. During his years of inner confrontation, 1913-1917, he engaged in visionary dialogues with figures such as Philemon, an inner guide who appeared with the wings of a kingfisher. Jung recognized Philemon as a personification of wisdom within the psyche, but he admitted that others might mistake such figures for literal spirits. In the modern world, the popularity of New Age spirituality, tarot, astrology, and online shadow work often reflects a Jungian influence. Yet without the discipline and caution Jung emphasized, these practices risk becoming escapism or even dangerous delusion. Spiritual seekers may neglect practical life, become isolated, or fall prey to manipulative cults. For Jung, mystical traditions were valuable because they symbolized psychological truths, but only when approached as symbols, not literal realities. When taken literally, they become traps. In his words, the gods have become diseases. Mystical symbols are doorways to the self, but they can also be prisons if mistaken for external absolutes. The thin line between individuation and madness. The ultimate goal of Jung's psychology is individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, into a balanced whole. Individuation requires confronting the shadow, engaging with the Anima Animus, and recognizing archetypal forces without being consumed by them. It is a lifelong journey toward the self, the inner totality that transcends the ego. Yet Jung repeatedly stressed that individuation is a dangerous path. The unconscious is not a tame garden but a wilderness filled with wild beasts. To encounter it is to risk losing one's sanity. Jung himself experienced this peril during his dark night after his break with Freud. For years, he endured visions and dialogues with inner figures that nearly drove him to break down. He later admitted, "I was menaced by a psychosis." The danger lies in the fragility of the ego. Individuation demands that the ego surrender its claim to absolute control, allowing unconscious material to emerge. But if the ego is too weak, it may be overwhelmed. Instead of integration, there is disintegration, psychosis, depression, or delusion. Jung compared individuation to a descent into the underworld. It can lead to rebirth, but it can also lead to death. Clinical examples illustrate this thin line. Some patients who attempted to explore their unconscious through dreams, visions, or active imagination found new strength and creativity. Others, however, were swallowed by hallucinations, hearing commanding voices or believing they were chosen by God. What differentiated healing from madness was often the presence of a guiding framework, therapy, community, or symbolic understanding. Jung insisted that individuation is not for everyone at every stage of life. It requires maturity, stability, and courage. For the unprepared, it can be catastrophic. He warned against dabbling in unconscious exploration as a form of entertainment or spiritual curiosity. The psyche, he argued, demands respect. Thus, individuation is the highest calling of Jungian psychology, but also its greatest risk. It promises wholeness, yet the road is strewn with wreckage. As Jung put it, the experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego. The question is whether the ego can survive this defeat and be transformed, or whether it will be shattered beyond repair. Modern context, Jungian dangers today. Although Jung developed his theories in the early to mid-20th century, his ideas continue to shape contemporary psychology, spirituality, and popular culture. Concepts like the shadow, archetypes, synchronicity, and individuation have spread far beyond academic psychology. They appear in films, novels, self-help books, and internet communities. This diffusion has made Jung's work accessible to millions, but it has also amplified the dangers he warned against. One of the clearest risks is the misuse of Jungian ideas in self-help culture. Online forums and social media are filled with people encouraging shadow work, dream journaling, or active imagination without professional guidance. While self-exploration can be empowering, unstructured confrontation with the unconscious may trigger anxiety, depression, or obsession. Without the therapeutic framework Jung considered essential, seekers may become trapped in the very archetypal dynamics they seek to integrate. A second danger is the appropriation of Jungian concepts by cults and extremist movements. Throughout history, archetypes like the hero, the savior, or the chosen people have been co-opted by manipulative leaders. In the modern world, spiritual groups and internet-based movements often invoke Jungian terms to justify grandiose visions or authoritarian control. The archetype of the wise old man, for example, can easily be projected onto a charismatic leader, granting him near-divine authority in the eyes of followers. Jung himself cautioned against such projections, emphasizing the need to keep archetypal material internal rather than externalizing it onto others. Additionally, Jung's engagement with mysticism has made his psychology attractive to esoteric and occult subcultures. While many use Jungian ideas responsibly, others use them to rationalize detachment from reality or to fuel conspiracy thinking. The language of archetypes, symbols, and collective energies can easily be twisted into literal metaphysical claims. This is particularly risky in digital spaces, where symbolic interpretations can be stripped of nuance and turned into dogmatic belief systems. Finally, Jung's popularity in creative industries also carries risks. Filmmakers, writers, and artists often draw on Jungian archetypes, producing rich cultural works. Yet for individuals deeply immersed in art or storytelling, the archetypal material may overwhelm their personal identity. As Jung warned, creative genius can border on madness when the unconscious flows too strongly into consciousness without balance. Thus, in the modern context, Jung's psychology remains as dangerous and powerful as ever. Its insights into the human mind are invaluable, but its misuse can foster delusion, fanaticism, and psychological collapse. The very accessibility of Jung's concepts makes them both transformative and perilous. Conclusion. Carl Gustav Jung's psychology is not merely a system of therapy but a map of the human soul. Unlike Freud, who sought to explain the unconscious in terms of childhood and sexuality, Jung charted a vast inner cosmos filled with archetypes, myths, and spiritual energies. He believed the psyche is not only personal but collective, not only rational but symbolic and numinous. Yet he also recognized that to journey into this cosmos is to risk destruction. That the dangerous places of Jungian psychology, the shadow, the anima and animus, the collective unconscious, archetypal inflation, dreams, active imagination, mystical engagement, and the perilous road of individuation are double-edged. They hold the key to transformation, creativity, and wholeness, but they also threaten to overwhelm the fragile ego. To deny these places is to remain shallow and fragmented, but to enter them carelessly is to risk madness. Jung's life itself embodied this tension. His years of inner confrontation nearly broke him, but they also gave birth to some of the most profound psychological insights of the 20th century. He compared the psyche to nature itself, beautiful, terrifying, creative, and destructive. Just as fire can warm or burn, the unconscious can heal or destroy. In today's world, where Jung's concepts circulate freely, his warnings are more relevant than ever. Shadow work, dream analysis, and archetypal exploration can enrich life, but they require humility, discipline, and often professional guidance. Without these, they may become traps that devour rather than liberate. Ultimately, Jung challenges us to face the truth that the mind contains both heaven and hell. The psyche is not a safe space, it is a wilderness where gods and demons dwell. To walk this wilderness is dangerous, but it is also the only way to become whole. As Jung himself wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." The dangerous places of Jungian psychology are therefore not to be avoided but to be approached with respect. They remind us that the mind is both sanctuary and abyss, both healer and destroyer. To navigate it is to walk the razor's edge between growth and collapse, between light and darkness, between individuation and madness.